Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the June 18th, 2014 Placer County Transportation Planning Agency meeting. We will begin with a flag salute. If you please stand and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk, please call them. Do what you do.
Cash. Here. Holmes.
Here.
Gore.
Here.
Nader.
Here.
Nesbitt. Here. Russland.
Here.
Yukovich. Here.
All right, we have a quorum. I'll ask the board to approve the minutes of May 14th, 2014. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of May 14th, 2014. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Cash.
Here.
Holmes.
Aye.
Gore.
Yes.
Nader.
Abstain.
Nesbitt. Russland.
Abstain.
Yukovich.
All righty, thank you.
Long enough.
Agenda review, is there anything on the agenda that needs reviewing? Hearing none, we'll move on to public comment. Now is the time for anyone in the audience that wishes to address the board of directors on any item that's not on the agenda. Seeing none, we'll close public comment. And then we'll move to the consent calendar. These items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't really want to pull the items from the consent calendar. I know these are kind of annual contracts, a lot of them that we renew.
Yes.
I would appreciate in future years, in the body of each of those contracts, maybe just a real brief thing that this was the cost last year, we're up 1% or whatever from the previous year. So we don't have to, it'll take staff 15 minutes to add that. It'll take me an hour to research out all of these and see what it was last year. So I think on each of these, it would be nice to just have a little thing that says this is up 1% or 1,000
Yes.
from the previous year, just so we kind of know how it's going. Most of the time, we're pretty happy with these people. We're happy with them, and the budget's only up 1%. We're happy. If we're unhappy and it's up 6%, we may want to think about it. So I just think that would be a good part of the analysis to include that. And so that's my comment. I don't want to pull all the items.
And I will just add a comment. In looking at these very quickly, I believe there is only one of them that is increased over last year, and that is the hourly rate of our legal services.
Yeah, so I appreciate that.
So all the rest are the same.
I think in the future, if they're just
Oh,
one
yeah.
sentence,
No,
that
that
this is no change from previous year, that helps us to analyze that, I'd appreciate it. So, with that done, I'll move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar. Is there any more discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Cash. Yes. Holmes.
Yes.
Gore.
Yes.
Nader.
Yes.
Nesbitt. Russland.
Yes.
Yukovich.
All righty, thank you. We will now adjourn as the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency and convene as the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency. And I'll ask the board to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar for the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency. Is there any more discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Cash.
Yes.
Holmes.
Yes.
Gore.
Yes.
Nader.
Yes.
Nesbitt. Russland.
Yes.
Yukovich.
We'll move to item H, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Service Agency fiscal year 2013-14 budget amendment number 2 and fiscal year 2014-15 budget.
Good morning. I'll be handling this item, members of the board. We're asking you to take two actions today: adopt the budget amendment number 2 for fiscal year 13-14, and to adopt a new budget for fiscal year 14-15. The Transit Operator Working Group and PCTPA's Technical Advisory Committee have concurred with the staff recommendations that we have here in the memo. And the recommendations included in the budget amendment are also consistent with the CTSA's short-range transit plan. Amendment number 2 increases the operating budget by $112,000 $472. There's two principal reasons for that. We received we were awarded a grant by Caltrans in 2011, and we finally received the FTA funds, and so we're adding $70,000 to the budget to account for that. And we're adjusting and updating the LTF apportionment, the Local Transportation Fund apportionment, to reflect the final apportionment as compared to the budget, which had used a preliminary apportionment. So those are the two changes to the operating budget for fiscal year 13-14. In regards to, in the fiscal year 13-14 amended budget, there's a carryover of $245,785, and that's carried over into the proposed budget for 14-15. And the proposed operating expenditures for 14-15, so there's a 6.4% increase as compared to the amended budget that I just discussed several minutes ago. The expenditures vary by category, and the most significant increase in the expenditures is a set-aside recommended by the Transit Operator Working Group for reimbursement of some Health Express trips that can be better accommodated on the dial-a-ride. So we have set aside several years' worth of funds out of the carryover for this particular purpose. And in that regard, those would be for trips that are basically over and above the ADA services that currently the dial-a-ride services provide. So as an example, if you recall at the Unmet Transit Needs hearing last fall, we had a gentleman here from Bowman who indicated that he was outside the dial-a-ride service area. So funds out of this pot of money could be used to fund Placer County Transit to provide the extension of dial-a-ride service to meet that gentleman's needs. So we're still working through the rules of the program, but we felt it was a good opportunity to set aside the funds for that purpose. The operating revenues show a decline of almost 10% compared to the amended 13-14 budget. And while that revenue decline is a concern, we're not yet at the end of this fiscal year, and so we need to do a closeout of the 13-14 operating budget, and it is highly likely that the deferred revenue amount that we show in the proposed 14-15 budget will increase. And we would come back to the board here in October to show that as part of the amended budget. So while it's a concern, we believe that the deferred revenue amount shown in the 14-15 budget is very low. That said, we do end the 14-15 with an operating surplus of slightly over $16,000, and so the budget balances. There are no changes proposed to the capital budget. The capital budget has consisted of Prop 1B funds. All of those funds have been allocated and awarded by this board to various projects, and all of those projects are underway and hopefully will be completed by next year. And with that, I'd be glad to take any questions.
Director Nader, did you have a question? You're like, no. Okay. Any questions to my right? Any questions on this side? Alrighty, then anybody in the audience wish to say anything about this item? Hearing none, we'll bring it back to the board for action.
Move for approval?
It's been moved and seconded to approve the Western Consolidated Transportation Service Agency fiscal year 2013-14 budget amendment number 2 and fiscal year 2014-15 budget. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Cash.
Yes.
Holmes.
Yes.
Gore.
Yes.
Nader.
Yes.
Nesbit. Westland.
Yes.
Yukavich.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you, sir. We will now adjourn as Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency and convene as the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. And we'll move to the item that everybody's waiting for. Item I, Nevada Station Office Building Refinancing.
Yes, this is my item. Good morning, Chair Holmes, members of the board. I'm presenting this item to refinance the Nevada Station Office Building, which is where the PCTPA offices are housed across the street here at 299 Nevada Street. And in sort of giving you a bottom line to this action, what we're asking is for you to approve this package, and it's a thick package, I will tell you there. But it refinances the bonds that we have that are existing under the same ownership structure that we currently have, with the same payoff term, so they pay off at the same date as original, but at a much lower interest rate. And the reality is we're looking at a 3 to 4% decrease in our interest rate, which translates to a decrease of about $500,000 in terms of interest payments over the remaining life of those bonds. So with that, I want to go into some background. Most of the members of the board were not on the board back in 2003 when we originally purchased the building, so I want to provide a little bit of background there. We also have here in the audience Mark Northcross from NHA Advisors, who is our financial advisor on this bond issue, Cameron Wiest, who is our bond counsel, as well as Mila Labadie, who is with Miller and Owen, who are our legal counsel. So with that, a little bit of background. It was actually the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority, or SPARTA, that purchased and owns the Nevada Station building. And that is because when we went to buy this building back in 2003, it is implied but not specifically stated in law that PCTPA, as a regional transportation planning agency, can own real estate. And so with SPARTA as a joint powers authority with the same legal abilities as its member jurisdictions, is allowed to own real estate. So we use that as a conduit for this process, which makes it a little bit more complicated because it is SPARTA that owns the building and PCTPA that leases it back from SPARTA. We do all the, we pay the bond payments, we manage the building, we do everything. SPARTA is really an owner in name only. And so we had used the California Local Government Financing Authority, which is with the Regional Council of Rural Counties, to facilitate the original bond issue, which is in two parts. There's a taxable and non-taxable part of that. It's because as a government entity, we're taking up about 37% of the building square footage. We don't pay taxes. So a non-taxable bond can cover those portions, whereas the rest of the building is at market rate. It is with, I would say, whatever quality tenants we can find that lease that space. And right now it's a mix of, we have a couple of nonprofits, we have counselors, we have a chiropractor, and so on. And those, in order to give us the flexibility to lease those spaces at market rate, are issued at a taxable bond rate. So that's the existing financing. And that went out with a bond issue. The interest rates we are currently paying on that is shown in Table 1. It's 6% on the tax exempt, 7 3/4 on the taxable. And because the taxable was at a higher rate, we have been paying that down first, making better financial sense. And that's why the current balance on the tax exempt is the same as the original issuance, but the balance on the taxable is much lower. So as part of that original financing, we were not allowed to refinance for 10 years. Well, that 10 years was up this past December, and so I've let the board know that we're pursuing this, and that's how we've come up with this package. Using NHA Advisors, we went out essentially for a bid for a private placement on this. And it's still a bond, but it's a little different because in most bond issues you have all kinds of institutional folks who buy the bonds, but they don't buy all the bonds. Because this is a relatively small bond issue, we're looking at just over $2 million. What's happened in the last couple of years, and Mark Northcross can talk to this even better than I can, institutional investors, particularly small banks, are looking at these bonds as being a good investment and are buying the whole thing, and they call that a private placement. And so what we did was to go out and get bids from these, and there were 13 banks that were contacted, and we got bids that are shown on Table 2. And the best one was from Umpqua Bank, which coincidentally is also our commercial bank for the agency. So there's a nice synergy there. And you can see these rates are, 3.25% for the tax exempt and 3.2% for the taxable, which I thought it was interesting that the taxable is even lower than the tax exempt in this. But a good bid is a good bid. Mm-hmm. And so staff is recommending that we move forward with that. Then as with any, if you refinanced your mortgage, there are expenses that go along with this. And those are shown on Table 3. And those expenses are contingent on this going through. So we don't owe these unless we actually go through with the bond issue. And I will note that the savings we are talking about are net of these. So it's after these are paid, we still realize the savings that we're talking about. So we have the same structure where Sparta will be acting on the same resolution and the same documents and agreements at their meeting next week. And there are a couple of the items that we are approving as to form. Actually, Sparta, as the owner, are signatory on those. We have gone out for bid on a trustee for the bonds, and U.S. Bank came up with the lowest bid, and so we're recommending that they be appointed trustee. And then having Wells Fargo Bank, who is the current trustee, they're the trustee of our current bonds, would be the escrow agent to pay off those bonds with the new proceeds. There are tons of details that go into this, and that's why the latest versions are in front of you. But I want to point out in the resolution that it does authorize staff, with the concurrence of our legal counsel, to make minor changes to these agreements to make sure that our interests are represented and that this goes through in our best interests, as well as meeting the needs of the bonding, Umpqua Bank, and all the parties involved. So with that, as I say, we have a lot of experts here that are happy to help me answer any questions.
Ready. Any questions, Director Nesbitt?
So the 94.5 in fees, is that financed into the whole thing, or is that coming? Okay.
Yeah, that is
So
part
you-
of the financing.
So even with the exponential growth of that by financing it, you're still saving the $400,000.
Yes.
Okay.
And that is that is current present value.
Correct.
The actual amount over time is about $500,000, and in a bottom line sort of way, it improves our cash flow by about $36,000 a year.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Quick question. So you have that additional, what, $35,000 a year. What's the intent, and how do you plan to use those additional funds?
Well, let me start out by saying, over the course of time, we've gone through an economic downturn and had quite a few vacancies over time. We are back into about even, but we have gone into our reserves for that, so it would be to build back our reserves. Ultimately, the plan is that was adopted back in 2003 is after all of the bonds are paid off, that the rents would go to augment our administrative costs and offset revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Director Yurkovich, did you have?
I had one question. On Table 3, I know what all the consuls are, but what does a financial advisor do?
Okay.
Did you advise on-
I'm sorry.
I know what all the bond consuls and all the others, but what's the role of a financial advisor?
Our financial advisor, Mark Northcross, can address that.
Thank you. Great question. A financial advisor is actually a company, a person that structures and manages debt financing for public agencies, but does not take a financial position in the actual bond sale by selling bonds, brokering bonds. So it's sort of like when you're selling a house and you contact a realtor, do you want to have a realtor who's representing both the buyer and the seller? Realtors here, they argue that, but there's a potential conflict of interest there. So many public agencies prefer to have somebody, when they're doing debt, who does not represent the buyer of the debt and them, just represents them as the seller of the debt. And so that's the short answer as to what a financial advisor is. I just represent you. I don't represent the investors. So, for example, in this case, where PCTPA is selling debt, selling bonds, if you will, to Umpqua Bank, I have no relationship with Umpqua Bank. I just legally represent PCTPA. And so that's the goal, is to get no conflict of interest in whoever is representing you when you're actually trying to do a financing. And if I could interrupt, there's one, I'm going to get into the weeds for a second. Celia mentioned U.S. Bank as trustee. We've had, just in the last few hours, a issue arise with them on their proposal where they may want to charge more. There is a possibility we may go to Union Bank. We were talking a difference of $1,000 a year. This is in the small end of the universe, but nevertheless, I want the board to know that there is a possibility that we may shift from U.S. Bank as trustee to Union Bank as trustee. Thank you.
Are there any more?
I have one. This isn't really relevant to you or actually the bonds so much, but maybe in general conversation. How is the vacancy factor doing on your building?
We're doing much better. We are breaking even. We do have one vacancy. It is a tough space to rent if you're familiar with it. There's only one window. It's and it's chopped up interestingly. But we continue to market that. The others are all fully rented out with long-term leases.
That's a big improvement, thanks.
Oh, yeah. We're very happy about that.
Well done.
Director Nesbitt.
Yeah, I wanted to tack on to Mr. Yukovic's. I think he was really more looking for an explanation of the actual services from the consultant, not who they represent, and I think maybe just some specifics about what the financial advisor does instead of who he represents.
Got it. Okay.
We appreciate you getting started, but we need to finish.
That's fine. So what do? Number one, I need to arrange a bid process so that clearly, I think most public agencies, when you're doing any sort of business, you want a paper trail that you went to multiple sources. So again, I'm not bringing something, they're getting into the weeds, Dodd-Frank, the big financial reform measure. At this point in time, that's narrowly defined, what conflicts of interest are. So in reality, I am almost legally prohibited from having too many conversations with Umpqua Bank. We have to go through what's called a placement agent. So we work with a firm, Southwest Securities, a guy named Mike Kavanaugh there. We use him in the role under Dodd-Frank as being the, quote, placement agent. But Mike and I work together to talk to all the banks, explain the credit, get bids. Then the next piece is evaluating the bids. The next piece after that is the actual legal structure of the transaction, working with your counsel, Cam Weist, with Mela, I got the name right, good, to actually make sure that all that stack of legal documents really matches what you want. The core issue in that really is your sublease, your ability to lease this to tenants. Most public agencies, we'll take County of Placer, you look at this facility here, there's no private sector tenants in it that I know of. You're different. You got a lot of private sector tenants. As Celia noted, that goes right into the heart of federal tax law. There are a whole bunch of questions. The lease agreement needs to be structured in a way to give you the maximum flexibility so that we don't interfere with your ability to generate revenue from subleasing Nevada Station. Another case in point is call features on the bond. Celia mentioned your bonds were call protected for 10 years. That's normal in the bond market. What we've done here is you have the ability to actually call the bonds if you want the day after you close on the refi. Now, there's a penalty of 5% for doing that. It drops down over time. But what we wanted to do there is that we never know. Maybe PCTPA gets an offer they really don't want to refuse for Nevada Station. It's, for multi-million dollars, whatever, and you want to sell the building. And it's to your advantage. Well, we don't want you to be stopped from selling the building. So we went with the Umpqua and we structured a call feature that enables you at a penalty to at least be able to sell the building if somebody walks in the door with an offer you don't want to refuse. That's an example of the kind of stuff we work with. We've also gotten comments back from Umpqua on things they want in the lease agreement, some of which are just fine and normal, some of which personally it's a no, not going to happen. We will sort that out. You're delegating to Celia the right to say no and kill the transaction. And there are circumstances under which, as your financial advisor, that's my job, is to say, no, we aren't going to do that. It's not worth it to this public agency. So I hope that helps give you a flavor of what we're about here.
All right, good. Thank you. Any more questions from directors? Seeing none, anyone in the audience have any additional comments? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board.
Move approval of items 1 through 6.
Did I hear a second? Oh. So we're being asked to approve the refinancing of the 2003 Nevada Station Office Building lease revenue bonds by adoption of resolution number 1422 as shown in attachment 1. Approve the following documents and authorizing the executive director to execute. Number 1 is a lease agreement. Number 2 is assignment agreement. Number 3 is a trust agreement. Number 4 is a termination agreement. And number 5 is the escrow agreement. Having a motion and second, will the clerk please call the roll?
Cash.
Yes.
Holmes.
Yes.
Gore.
Yes.
Mayor.
Yes.
Nesbitt. Westland.
Yes.
Yukovich.
All righty, thank you very much. Now we'll move to item J, the legislative position on cap and trade proposals for transportation. Celia.
Well, we've gone from the good news about money to the not so good news about money. And that is, first of all, the board is requested to take action on the proposals for distribution of cap and trade. And over the weekend, the legislature adopted the budget and included AB 852, which made that decision on how to allocate cap and trade funds for the current year and somewhat for future years. I've provided for you in attachment 1 of this item the various proposals that were on the table. And what ended up being the compromise, if you will, was that the governor got $250 million of cap and trade for high-speed rail and essentially a promise that on an ongoing basis, 25% of the money would continue to go to high-speed rail. Let me back up a bit, and I sometimes forget, I live and breathe this stuff, and not everybody does. So just to back up, cap and trade came out of AB 32 that was adopted by the legislature back in 2006. That is to reduce greenhouse gases by 2020 to a 1990 level. And part of that allowed for cap and trade, which is that essentially businesses have to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and that's the cap, either do it themselves or buy credits, and that's the trade. And there is an auction of these credits that generates money that would go to reducing greenhouse gases on a statewide basis. And there's a lot of different thoughts on how much money this will generate, hundreds of millions to tens of billions. And so at this point, they are guessing $850 million for this year. Don't know if that's really going to come out that way. You don't know until those auctions happen. I will also note that this does not hit fuels until next year in 2015, and the AB 32 requirement does expire in 2020. I would expect that there is going to be an impact on gas prices once the refineries are being asked to pay this. Mm-hmm. And so I would not be surprised if things change next year when those start to hit, but this is what we've got at the moment. And as I say, $250 million this year, but 25% going to high-speed rail. This year they have $25 million going to intercity rail and transit operations. Now, certainly, intercity rail is good for us. That's the Capital Corridor rail service, and expanding that is something that we've been pushing for 20-plus years. And so having more money to do that is a good thing. But that is, at this point, going to be competitive at the California Transportation Commission level. There is also $25 million for transit operations that would go via the state transit assistance formula, so all of our transit operators would see some small portion of that, and we can do a calculation on what it is. I wouldn't exactly start spending it quickly because I don't think it's going to end up being a whole lot of money. Then $130 million would go to sustainable communities projects, things like transit-oriented design, things that support a sustainable community strategy that has been adopted in SACOG's Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And that would be competitive at the Strategic Growth Council, which is a statewide entity. I'm told they only have 5 staff people. Right. And so administering a large program like this has raised some questions on how they're actually going to do that. There's $200 million that it goes for low carbon transportation. Not exactly sure what that is. And then another $242,000 towards weatherization, energy, water waste, and waste diversion. Again, a little unclear as to how that helps greenhouse gases, but those are some areas that are not under my expertise. On an ongoing basis, again, the high-speed rail, then 5% going to jurisdictions on the state transit assistant formula for transit operations. So there is some ongoing support for that. Then there's 10% that would go for transit capital and operations that support sustainable community strategy. Again, statewide competitive. 10% going to sustainable communities, the transit-oriented design, and so on. Again, statewide competitive. 10% to affordable housing, and then 40% to low-carbon transportation, waste diversion. It's kind of amorphous as to what that exactly looks like, and there is no strong sense about how it will be spent or who will be in charge of spending it. And that is going to be an annual discussion, possibly food fight, that goes on at the legislature. But one of the things that I find most concerning in all of this, based on our previous discussions, is that the regions are tasked with putting together a sustainable community strategy under the Metropolitan Transportation, Regional Transportation Plan under SB 375. But the funding to implement it all seems to be at the state. There seems to be no interest in putting the money with the responsibility. And I find that very concerning personally, and I think based on the board's conversations in the past, I would think that would be of concern to the board as well. I have been told, and I attended a meeting at the California Association of Councils of Governments, or CalCog, of which we're a member, and Chair Holmes sits on that board, where we heard a lot about this. So the chair may want to chime in on some of the comments on this. But I had heard that there are certain social equity interests, public health interests, bicycling interests that do not trust regions to spend the money in a way that benefits their particular interest. And they seem to have the ear of a lot of the legislature, and probably the governor as well, which may be why things look the way they look. So with that, I'm still recommending that the board approve the action requested, which is to continue to fight for the maximum local control of the funds and maximize the amount of money going to transportation, with the knowledge that so far we haven't been as successful as we'd like.
Right, it was a rather dour report at CalCog, and it's kind of disconcerting that the legislature doesn't trust local government that has the knowledge of what the hell's going on and what we need to do. And it's just kind of cryptic out there, and so it's a work in progress. It needs some serious massaging, and we just have to stay on top of it. And I want to thank Celia for chiming in at the CalCog meeting at a very important part that kind of validated what was being said. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I heard that one of the priorities was that monies would be directed towards disadvantaged areas. It sounds to me like a little bit of social justice. I heard you mention the word already. I'm having a hard time, as you went through that list, seeing a nexus between this and improving air quality and improving transportation projects. And I think you already alluded that this is a potpourri of whoever can bend somebody's ear harder than the other. But I think it's really a misuse of the money. It should be going towards improving air quality and improving transportation, nothing else. I don't know how they justify the amount of money they're putting towards a bullet train, towards improving transportation and air quality, because the bullet train starts at nowhere and ends at nowhere. It's just a project to put some people to work is all I see. So sorry to be on a soapbox.
No, that's right.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that the ultimate amount of greenhouse gas savings that comes out of some of these things is really yet to be determined. Now, I'm not an expert on, things like waste diversion and what that does for greenhouse gases, but I think that perhaps first of all, if a lot of the funding is coming from transportation sources, which will kick in next year, and that they're not going to transportation sources, I think is very troubling. And especially if this is being looked at as a new source of funds for all kinds of, to cure all kinds of ills, and not focusing on what cap and trade is supposed to be, which is for greenhouse gases. I wonder whether there might be a backlash, and that once 2020 rolls around, that cap and trade would not move forward.
You mentioned that there might be some backlash next year when this kicks in, because there was a news report last night that not only will the refineries be passing on their costs, also individual gas stations will be hit. It's like double taxation, I would think. You're going to hit the refineries, going to hit the gas stations. And there was a legislator on the news saying, this is not right, this is not the right time. So the bantering about whether this is the right thing to do has already started.
Director Hesh.
Thank you. Spent a lot of time studying this. I also sit on the SACOG board, and we had not really a similar item before us, but we certainly had the cap and trade general issue before us. We came up with a good solution for SACOG that I was able to vote for, but I'm not at all enthused about this. I was pretty negative when I came in. I appreciate your excellent report and telling it the way it really is. It was a very honest report, not necessarily an easy report to make. The issue with the state, again, not trusting us to make our local decisions, and yet, on the same hand, they turn around and they tell us exactly what to do and don't send us any money to do it. This has got to stop sooner or later. I'm not sure voting no on this is where to stop it at. I think it's probably irrelevant, but I know my vote's going to be no.
Okay. There is some Alka-Seltzer.
I need heavier drugs than that.
Did you have a comment?
Yes, I
Director?
did. Thank you.
Okay, Director.
Having been on the Air Quality Control Board when this all got together, the idea was that an industry, rather than paying the money to clean up their individual industry or company, would buy these credits, and that money would be used somewhere to offset the pollution that this individual company made. And the idea sounded real good, but as it's turning out, that's not what's happening. And what I'd like to propose possibly is that the Association of Transportation Agencies throughout the state, and maybe the SACOS, or not the SACOS, but the Air Quality Control Boards, start a lobbying effort to try to either get this back on the right track, using the money the way it was supposed to be to reduce or improve air quality and have some measurable method. I agree with what's been said. Once the price of gas goes up, then everybody's going to scream and holler. But right now, this is kind of the open purse for a lot of people. And I thought last night that part of this money is going to be used for early child care. Basically, they were getting money, part of this for pre-kindergarten. But anyway, so I guess my point is that if there could be some effort lobbying-wise in the next year.
Well, I will, and I failed to mention this. Last year when this came up, the board agreed to join the Transportation Coalition for Livable Communities, which is something like what you're talking about, is trying to negotiate for the best package possible for transportation and trying to put the impacts, the cap and trade funds that come from transportation to go to transportation. And quite frankly, they attended a lot of hearings, membership attended a lot of hearings, did a lot of negotiation. SACOG was a key part of that, as well as the California Alliance for Jobs, and CalCog director Bill Higgins was in on a lot of these. And at the 11th hour, it did not prevail. I mean, my understanding from CalCog is that a couple of weeks ago, the California Alliance for Jobs backed out because they were spending money for this lobbying effort, and clearly it was not going in a way that was acceptable to their members. And one of the things, and one of the hopes I think a lot of us had starting out was the benefit of improved road pavement for air quality, and there is a correlation there, and buses use roads as well, but the less resistance uses less gas. I mean, there is a greenhouse gas benefit to that, and that has just fallen by the wayside. And I think that certainly pavement management and improved pavement is something that everyone can support, but that did not prevail.
Any more comments regarding this issue? I just have one comment about waste diversion. I know there's projects in the works with gasification where all the waste could be burned and there would be no... We're kind of doing that with biomass, but there's been talk about putting just regular garbage in and burning it, and so there's no emissions. So I may be off base, but I've heard about that. I think it was in Scientific American.
I think the advantage there is the emissions are captured.
Yeah.
They have a filtering system,
Yeah.
as opposed to venting off in a landfill,
Right.
where they try to capture the gases, but they don't capture them all.
Right. Okay, great. Well, what do we want to do here?
So I have a question about
sorry.
clarification.
Oh, you realize-
And my question is, so we're asked to take action on just supporting maximizing local control of funds and maximizing the amounts of funds directed toward transportation. So we're not taking support of the legislature and the governor's cap and trade proposal. We're just making sure that PCTPA advocates for what's the best interests of local government and local transportation needs, right?
It's providing me direction to keep fighting the good fight.
Okay, because we don't support the governor and legislature's proposal, obviously,
Right.
but we want to make sure if we can get any of those funds,
Yeah,
that's what we
right.
want you
Exactly.
to do.
And that's her job right there.
Great,
All
thank
right.
you.
Okay, so I will entertain a motion. Oh, I'm sorry, there's another.
Are we allowed to say what she just said in the letter, that we don't support? Or is that not a good thing to be saying in a letter?
Well, I wasn't suggesting writing a letter on this,
No.
but, as this moves forward, as there are opportunities to voice our opinion, to say we need to, what's going to happen now is that sometimes the devil is in the details, and for example, who gets to decide on some of this money and what the criteria is has yet to be determined. So the more that we can weigh in and say, okay, if this is the legislature has said, 10% is going to go to transit, well, let's make sure that our types of transit systems get, a share of that, that there's an opportunity for smaller operators to be competitive, things of that nature, and to advocate, for example, on that 40% that goes to a whole laundry list of things, to say, transportation needs to be on that list. So it's not necessarily, we can certainly say we don't support the way this is going, but I would recommend that we also look towards making the best of what we've got.
So are you saying if we say too much in a negative way, that would hurt our chances of getting something good out of it? Is that what you're trying?
Well, to be...
Because I think we need to clearly send a message. I mean, this board member wants to vote no. Obviously, I don't know how the rest of the board feels. You can sense that I'm irritated. I don't know if we need to be sending some kind of message. I realize we may feel like, well, what's the point? But I think, at some point we need to put our stake in the ground.
Well, of course, you can, take an action that say you oppose the legislature's action on cap and trade, and I will absolutely communicate that. I think that's a clear message. At the same time, still trying to get some money out of this.
Well, I wouldn't want to do anything to compromise us doing that.
I don't think that you run into any particular problems in terms of opposing this, because there's a policy aspect of it and an implementation aspect of it. And a lot of what I will end up doing is working with peer agencies and trying to make the guidelines and the criteria as advantageous to us and to other transportation interests as possible. But at the same time, communicating to policymakers like our legislators and so on that this board does not support cap and trade being divided up the way the legislature has done.
I have no doubt in your ability, Celia, with your relationship with California Alliance for Jobs, the California Transportation Commission, CalCog, SAGCOG, on, that you will do the best you can to get the best deal for Placer County and this agency. And I don't want to have anyone get in your way. I've been with you in several meetings throughout the state, and your leadership is unparalleled. So I'm very confident that you can do the best you can for this agency. And that's all I have to say. Now,
I feel comfortable with the motion because I think you're going to communicate our concerns and what we brought up today to everyone you talk to in the most tactful manner that you can without crippling your advances on the other front. So I'm comfortable with it.
So is that a motion then? Oh,
I have one other last comment. I would agree with some of my colleagues that we shouldn't support this motion, that we need to send a message, at least at the policy level, that we don't agree with the cap and trade, as you say, with the nitty gritty and the whatever. But I think if we go along and, oh yeah, this is fine and okay, they need to know that, at least I think, that the way the funds are being distributed is not okay. So.
Might I, I'm sorry. Might I suggest that, what you're suggesting is not, the two things are not mutually exclusive, and that the board may want to consider taking action to oppose transportation funds as they're split up by the legislature in AB 852, or saying that the board opposes using cap and trade funds for anything but transportation, or however the board wants to represent that. That does not preclude the board from saying, that being the case, get what you can out of this.
I'm sorry, Director Russell.
I agree, and I think there's a balance here, and I think we could achieve that. So I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but again, I think there are two separate items that we could work together to our advantage. As I see it with your leadership, I think we can achieve that.
And my question is, this has already been passed through the legislature, so this is already a done deal for now. And I know that we want to advocate for whatever we can get at the local level. And I'm not sure where the place is to say we disagree with having these funds utilized for projects that don't necessarily address greenhouse gases.
I would suggest that any letter would fall on deaf ears except for our Republican friends in the legislature. They're opposed to this as well. So we want to send a letter. It's kind of, I think, a moot point, but if it makes us feel better, I'm glad to do that. Okay, wait, I have one down here.
If it makes the board feel better, we could make two motions. We could make one that she needs to chase down every dollar we can, and we can make a secondary motion that say we unilaterally oppose the distribution of those funds the way it's presented.
All right. And then Mr. Hesh.
Thank you. My comment is this has been a very insightful discussion, similar to the one we had at SACOG. Every point carries a lot of weight for me. The final point that I'm going to end up, depending on how the motion is actually structured, is going to depend on my constituency. And my constituency has sent a clear, loud message to me, almost unanimous. If I can only say that in a small community, but it's almost unanimous. Cap and trade is faulty from the initial concept. I'm going to be proud, subject to how it's worded, to vote no on this and be able to hold my head and shoulders high to my constituents and say, I didn't vote for cap and trade in any form. So we'll just see how the motion is structured.
Okay.
And I'll make my final decision based on that. Thank you for listening to me.
Okay. Director Nesbitt, did you have any more comment? Or?
Still on?
Yeah.
It,
Oh, yeah, I know. We got to look into that. We're kind of tight budget here. So anyhow, we need to somehow, can someone fashion a motion to?
What I'd like to do on that forming of the motion is have our executive director give us some guidance, because I like the dual motion. So maybe you could kind of say something and I could repeat it.
Right here.
Well, I mean, the one motion being the one provided here.
Yeah.
And that could actually, well, I'm thinking on the fly here, support proposals for, I would say that action requested with adding to maximize the amount of funds not only directed to transportation, but awarded to local jurisdictions.
There you go.
So a third part of that. As for the other part of the motion, the board could opt to oppose cap and trade. The board could opt to oppose the use of cap and trade funds for non-transportation uses. The board could opt to oppose the use of cap and trade funds for the distribution that is provided in AB 852, which was, and I will add that the decision has been made for this year, but there's an ongoing funding revenue that will come out of the annual budgetary process, and particularly that 40% that seems very amorphous to me is probably going to end up being negotiated with a lot of interest groups. So that might be something that the board would oppose, that 40% going to anything but transportation. There's some options there that are overarching, and I'm not sure what phrasing might be most helpful to the board.
Would it be helpful if you craft a letter and then send it out to directors and then have
You know,
them sign?
certainly we can bring the this back to the board at your next meeting, because since the action has been taken for this year, I don't expect much to happen in the next month.
Right.
So perhaps I can craft something for the board's consideration.
Yeah.
I think at this point in time, I think we can make a secondary motion that says this board opposes the proposed and the current distribution of those funds. And I think we can make it that simple.
Alrighty, well, I'm going to ask for the action that's requested here. Maximize local control of funds, maximize amount of funds directed to transportation and local jurisdictions. So let's see how that. It's been moved and seconded to support the action requested to maximize local control of funds and maximize amount of funds directed to transportation and local jurisdictions. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Cash.
Yes.
Holmes.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Nader.
Yes.
Nesbitt. Westland. Yes.
All right, thank you. Now,
And then, Mr. Chairman, I would make a second motion that the board would unilaterally oppose the current method and the proposals for distribution of those funds.
any more comment, discussion? No. Already, there's been a motion and a second. Can you repeat the motion so everybody, particularly Director?
The board would unilaterally oppose the proposed and current distribution of cap and trade funds of,
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's right.
that's fine. Okay. Alrighty, we have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Hesh.
Yes.
Holmes.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Nader.
Yes.
Nesbitt. Westland. Yes. Hugovich.
All right, fair enough. Thank you, everyone. That was a very robust discussion. And now we are at item K, the Executive Director's Report.
Yes, I've got a number of items for the board today. First, we are, and I guess apropos of our discussion of money, staff is working hard on moving forward with our funding strategy. We have done some focus groups. We are doing some polling later on in July, and we expect to have a presentation to the board at your August meeting. We've also been out talking to a lot of folks and working through our list of a lot of key people around the county to get their thoughts and recommendations and concerns about ways that we can generate dollars locally to address our transportation needs, because it's pretty clear that the state and the feds are not going to be of any help. Certainly the cap and trade is an indication that the state's attitude, and this is probably a second item, and going into a second item, because the state's attitude is certainly much more of a top-down, that the state wants to not only control new funds, but I also attended a meeting last week on the State Transportation Improvement Program and how those funds are decided and new guidelines for that. Now, those 75% of those are regional transportation improvement programs that are decided on by local regional transportation planning agencies such as PCTPA. Now, as a practical reality, we've borrowed against those dollars and probably won't see any for another 15 years or so. But I was in attendance at this meeting because the guidelines seem to be moving much more towards a state-directed. There was a lot of attendance by various interest groups, social equity groups, public health groups. Certainly not necessarily transportation groups, or trying to make changes to the guidelines to make their projects compete better, quite bluntly. And I see that as being a challenge to local control of those dollars. And so that's something that we need to continue to be aware of. And I think, based on the board's longstanding support of local control, try our best to fight against. So moving from the more depressing to the less depressing, I wanted to update the board on the concept of stopping the high occupancy vehicle carpool lanes on I-80 short of the 8065 interchange as a stopgap until we can do something more major to improve that project. We are working to get some modeling started, but we're running into a bit of a challenge because we're now in the non-summer months and the traffic patterns change when school is in session. And so we want to have the most accurate information to provide to Caltrans to persuade them that this is an improvement to safety. So that is ongoing, but I wanted to provide the board with a little bit of update that it's going a little slower than we had originally thought. But we're looking at a presentation on that in September or October. Then we are scheduling a board meeting in July, a regular board meeting. We expect it to be rather short. It is for an Airport Land Use Commission item, a hearing for a compatibility, to make sure that it agrees with our compatibility plan. So I don't expect it to be a long meeting, but we will be here in July. And then finally, on the good news front, Lincoln Bypass Phase 2A, which is the additional 2-lane segment for a total of 4 lanes from Nelson Lane to 0.9 miles north of Westwise Road. It's a 6.6-mile segment. It is being opened this weekend, and hopefully you've all received your invitations to the ribbon-cutting ceremony that is this Friday at 9 a.m. I do apologize that the event was not scheduled a little bit sooner to get on your calendars. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a conflict with the Fix 50, and we were not sure that we were going to end up on the same day and time as the Fix 50 event, and that would have really reduced any kind of media coverage that we would have gotten. But that was resolved a couple of days ago, and so we are moving forward with Friday, and the road segment will actually open to the public sometime late on Sunday night. So it will be open for the Monday commute. The event is being held, if you go to Westwise Road at the bypass, there will be signs, and you'll actually be on the new 2-lane segment just north of Westwise Road. We're going to do it at the bridge over Coon Creek, and that's the site. it'll be pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Okay?
All right.
And that concludes my report.
Okay, any, yeah.
You said didn't want to do the study for the commuter lane because it's non-summer hours, but this is the summer, so I'm a little confused.
Right. Well, the traffic patterns change when school is out versus when school is in, particularly Sierra College, but also other schools. And it changes the traffic patterns, and we want to use the more normal traffic
So
patterns.
you want to do it when it's non-summer?
Right. If I explained that opposite, I apologize.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Director
Thank
Nader?
you, Mr. Chairman. I routinely get people complaining to me about the traffic slowdown between Blue Oaks and Galleria, both directions. Pretty much it's all day. It seems like there isn't too many times it's not. I know you've mentioned to us in the past that there's a proposed project. When can I tell people that they can expect to see some resolution to that?
Well, we are working on the environmental document for the widening of 65, and the board had approved the awarding of the contract for the consultant on that. And Luke McNeil-Caird here is the project manager on that. We've had 2 meetings of the project team, and so we're moving forward on that. I think in terms of the public, though, they want to know when they can drive on it. And that's the sticking point, because construction money is, we're looking at $115 million for the full project. It can be done in phases, and I expect it will be. But in terms of having the cash to do it, we do have some funding that would come through the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority through developer fees, but those fees haven't happened. I mean, we have to collect those fees over many years. So that's one of the reasons we're doing our funding strategy, is to figure out how we can get some of those needs addressed without having to wait possibly decades.
So I would take it we can expect it to get worse before it gets better.
Yes.
That's not good news for an elected official to give to citizens.
It is not good news for transportation people either. And like I say, that's why we're working on this funding strategy, and it's not just on 65. There are a lot of areas, the pavement around the county is going to get worse as well, because the funding is just not coming.
Alrighty. Board direction to staff, I think we've pretty much given her full plate, but is there any other board of direction to staff? All right, seeing none, informational items are in your packet if you want to review them. And with that, I'll note that the next meeting is July 23rd, 2014. And with that, we are adjourned.